Welcome to my humble shop. Thanks for tuning in. I'm excited to have you guys. I'm excited to talk about the build and answer questions and share what I've learned. Basically, I have two cars in the shop. The one to my right, which is the car I ran last season. It's the one that we built after the fire at Oregon. And then I have the car on my left, which is the new car. Alright, so one question I get a lot is what do we do? How do you make an SP car? And the first thing I'll say is you certainly don't have to do all of this. This is just kind of the way I like to build a car. I like to have a nice clean car. Some of the stuff that we do the car, basically as you can see here, this was the old recce car. We had it sandblasted to get down to the base metal. And then the plan is here next week we will be painting it. I think I'll talk a little bit next week as to why we paint it, what color. I gave a lot of thought to powder coating. So it was powder coating the shell versus painting the shell. We can probably discuss that a little bit. But at any rate, you can see here we pull all the paint off of it. And even underneath here what we do is we pull off all of the sound deadening material, including, as you can see underneath the car, basically there's a fair amount of time spent pulling all the sound deadening material off the car. We just really see that as added weight. And then it makes the car a lot easier to seam weld. And it makes, when we paint it, it looks nice, and it's just easier to clean the bottom when it's a fresh coat of paint. So one of our main goals is to try to lower the center of gravity as much as possible. That's just going to allow us to have less roll in the corners, basically keep as much traction as possible on all four tires at all times. So with this car, one thing that we're doing is we have now switched to a company out of Europe that builds a homologated cage. You know, it's a nice cage. It's a strong cage. It's lightweight, which will help us to shed a lot of weight out of the car, which will allow us to putting weight where you want it, not where you don't. So getting weight out of the top half of the car and putting in weight down at the bottom. All right, so what you're seeing here are the two cage materials. There's the cage material that we used last year in the car, and you can see how the sidewall is much thicker and the pipe weighs substantially more. And then on the homologated cage that we are installing in the new car, you can see how the roll bar wall is much thinner. Another thing that we're doing to help lower the center of gravity in the car, relocating any of the electronics and items that we have in the car as low as possible. And then also with the driver and co-driver seat, we are redesigning the seat rails so that we can potentially have the seats, specifically the co-driver seat, almost an inch or two lower than what was in the previous car. So yes, I'm not planning on racing a convertible. We take the roof off as part of stripping the car down. That just allows us to ensure we're getting proper welds on the top of the cage. It's easy to take the roof off and it goes back on pretty easy, so it just makes more sense to do it that way. One thing that you won't see here yet, but you'll see is probably part of next week's video, is we strengthen these strut towers. And what we do with that is adding steel to the top of the tower, probably a 1/4 inch thick plate of steel go on the top, gets welded on, and then we seam weld this piece on just to really make sure that each strut tower is as strong as possible. At the end of the day, that's the part taking the impact, and we've all seen the pictures of the struts sticking through people's hoods, and that's what we're trying to avoid by doing that. Another thing that I'm really excited about is this main hoop. The main hoop in this homologated cage is approximately 2 to 3, almost 3 inches further back than on my current car, which is going to allow us to place the driver's seat and co-driver's seat much further back, which will help push the center of gravity towards the back of the car and even out some of the weight that's up on the front. So you can see in this car, my seat is basically as far back as it can go. It's pretty much all the way up against the roll cage compared to the main hoop on the homologated cage. The new car, you can see how the main hoop is more in line with the B-pillar, and which is going to allow us to get that seat just a tad bit further back, which is going to help me a little bit with leg room. Another item, which I think the guys are all pretty excited about, is in the back of the car here. As you can see where the roll cage mounts to the rear strut towers, how it has this kind of teardrop shape, which will allow the team and the crew guys to get sockets in there to pull the rear struts off if need be in a hurry. Here in 1.2, the current car, the way that we design the cage and that the way it ties into the rear strut tower, that bolt was on the front end of the brace, which meant you had to do it with a spanner wrench versus a ratchet, and just took substantially longer to do. Another big question that you guys have asked is seam welding versus stitch welding. And I think it's kind of a personal preference. I believe that seam welding the entire car can be probably a little bit overkill. The previous car and then this car is also, as you can see, just stitch welded. And for those of you who don't know what it is, stitch welding are these welds every so often, which just help to strengthen the shell of the car and add rigidityness to it. If you were to seam weld it, you would basically run a continuous weld all along the seam. You know, it's probably overkill, I think would be our take on it, but certainly something you could do if you would like and have the time. We're still under the process of seam welding, so we've got a lot left to do, but you know, up at the engine bay, all of these items will be seam welded underneath the car. I'll get seam welded, and you know, through the whole back, pretty much anywhere any of these body panels are connecting will get seam welded. Another item that you see that we install are these jack stands sleeves. That just makes the car easier to service. As you can see by this car, with jack stands are in the car, and basically how it allows us to service the car. Some of the other items I'm looking forward to talking to you guys about are the brakes. You know, if you guys have interest, I'd like to, you know, basically here I run the AP Racing Brakes System package, but there's also a less expensive option. Either way, you got to really run one of the two options to be able to fit in the 15-inch gravel rim, and I can kind of go over the pros and cons of both. Let's see, what else do we have for questions? Is this a stage rally car for America? Do the rules call for upgraded roll cages every year? The answer to that is no. Basically, you install your roll, if you want to build a rally car, you install a roll cage into the car, and then you have it logbooked at your first event. And unless for some reason Rally America makes some change in the rules, the cage is good to go. Alright, so let's see, what are some of the other questions that you guys had? Is it true you guys do not use fuel cells? That's a good question. Essentially, that is true. Some of the SP cars, well, really only one, I believe, the one that Dylan was running last year, that one had a fuel cell in it. Basically what happens here is there has to be some modification down in this area in order for it to fit. We've talked about it. I looked at installing it last year, and specifically after the fire in Oregon, but the cost is about $10,000 to $14,000. So it's just an item that we've decided isn't necessary. With the fire that we had in Oregon, I don't believe that it would have made any difference with the drive shaft going through the fuel tank. It was one of those kind of rare items. Instead, what we do is there's a few options, and I could show you. The first one here, we have a Kevlar guard that sits on top of the fuel tank, and basically that is just going to shield it from any punctures, gravel rash, that sort of thing. And then we also have some aluminum ones as well that we can place on if we have some increased concern, and I can show you those if you'd like. Well, that kind of covers it for this week. I hope you saw some really cool stuff, learned a few new things. If you've got questions, feel free to comment. I'll try to answer them either on Facebook or in next week's video. If you've got questions for the coming weeks, feel free to throw them out there, and I'll make sure to jot them down so that we cover them as the project goes on. If you guys have interest in seeing the shop or the hauler or the stacker trailer, let me know. Otherwise, yeah, I think that's about it.